What do I do now? I'm holding a mic and a bucket. Let's put our hands towards our offering. God, thanks for the day and thanks for this opportunity. God, your word says that if we test you in this way, you open the floodgates of heaven and pour out a blessing so much that no man can contain. You give to us a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. Men will pour into our laps. You rebuke the devourer for our sakes, and you're able to do exceedingly abundantly more than we can ask or think. God, we're sowing seeds in faith, and we're expecting a harvest with kingdom results. So bless us indeed. Enlarge our territory. Keep your hand on us and keep evil away from us. In Jesus' name. And those in agreement say, Amen. Amen. Hallelujah. All right. Well, as I said, today we have a guest speaker today. And like y'all are welcome. Are you guys coming up together or one at a time?
One at a time.
Look at Chris Gray, our new Italy missionary.
Thank you so much, Pastor. I love this building. Pastor gave me a quick tour. It was amazing. I love being in these older buildings. I've always told Kim as we've been traveling, we've been in a different church every Sunday, and we pass through some of these older neighborhoods and go, man, I wish I could go inside that church just to see the history in it. And to be in one of those older buildings today is amazing. Only one other time we managed to be in one of those older buildings, and it's just amazing. So my name's Chris Gray, and it's my beautiful wife, Kim, up here in the front row. Yes, clap, 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 clap. My two children are downstairs with your children. We have Cooper and Bria. They are 6 and 7 years old. Cooper's the older one. And I like to say that we did not follow directions. You see, they are 9.5 months apart. So if you do the math there. And on top of that, they are both in first grade together.
Oh, wow.
So when they graduate from high school, they'll graduate together, and we will be empty nesters all at once. But that's still ways off. So Bria's looking forward to the time where she's the same age as her brother for a couple of months. So come the end of July, she'll be 7, and so they'll both be 7 until October. So those months are coming up soon. So I have 2 7-year-olds, but they're not twins. So today I'm here to share a little bit about our story of how we got into missions and where we're going, and share a little bit of scriptures with you. I always like to start out with giving you a snapshot of what Italy looks like. And I will start out by saying that I'm one of those crazy missionary kids. I actually grew up in Italy, and I moved there when I was 6.5 years old, left when I was 18. And so I do know the language. I do speak it well. But a lot of people are like, why Italy? Aren't the Catholics all there? Aren't they all Christians there? I'm here to tell you today that they're not. It's a very dark place. And so, as a quick snapshot of that, I have a story that I like to share. I don't know if you guys have any Kiwanis clubs in this area, but Kiwanis clubs, typically they raise funds for children's groups, children's fundraisers, whatever you want to call them. I'm part of one of the Kiwanis clubs in Springfield, Missouri, because that's where we're out of. And one of my friends there, probably now about 2 years ago, he went to Italy. And he is a Catholic. And so he was there touring the country on vacation, and he went inside one of these beautiful buildings. And as you may have seen in the movies or tourist attractions, you have these beautiful buildings with stained glass windows. You have beautiful columns. You have all this marble stuff going on, all these statues to look at. So he's walking through this building. This building probably could have seated probably about 2,000 people. And so as he exited, he saw this plaque on the door that said the times of services, and it just happened to be the next day that they're going to have services. So he's like, okay, I'm a Catholic. I want to go see and go attend an Italian Catholic service. And so he shows up the next morning, And a guy meets him at the front door. He goes, "Oh, you're here to see the building. I can give you a tour. I can show all the backside." He goes, "No, I'm here for the service." And the guy was just, "What? You're here for the service? Somebody's here for a church service?" And he said, "Yeah." So he actually, it's okay. And so he walked off, and there was like a door off to the side, similar to this one, but this one goes outside. But there's a small room, and you go in there, and there was about 15 people in there for the service. And the reason I bring that to you is in Italy, they are Catholics. Just like here in the States, a lot of people say we're Christians. But if everybody who said they're a Christian in this town and in our country, would there be an empty seat in here? No, there is not. And it's the same in Italy with Catholics. You know, if you drive around the United States on a Saturday, typically is when they have their services, you'll see all the Catholic churches, the parking lots will be full. You go to Italy, that's not necessarily the case. They show on the news, oh, at the Vatican, yeah, there's thousands of people there. Most of those are not Italians. Most of those are foreigners coming to do their pilgrimage. And so you walk into an Italian Catholic church, for the most part, it is very mellow. There's hardly anybody there. And so I tell you that just to kind of give you a glimpse. They're not much different from us. But there is one statistic I want to leave you with is most Italians and Europeans, only about 2% of them have ever met an evangelical Christian. Met. Doesn't mean know. I mean that they know them. They've just met. Only 2%. So if you just think of that in your minds of where we're at here in the United States, most people have met an evangelical Christian here in the States. So I also want to share one last thing with you on that is we call them I'm got off my track of my mind here. So they're Catholics, but most of Europe is now what they call secularist. And secularism in a nutshell is they know of Christ, they have knowledge, but they essentially reject him. They put themselves above God. And so I'm just going to read a quick snippet of that because you can do a huge study on this. This just goes deep. But it says here, the religion of secularism as a worldview does not have God or any God at its center. The absolute authority in one's life is self. The individual is now the authority of life, and the concept of serving an active, engaging God is foreign. The horizon of eternity has vanished, and the person simply lives for today to enjoy the moment. We see a little bit of that already creeping into the United States. We probably saw a lot of that with all the political stuff going on this past year and what's still going on. But the United States, I think, is probably about 30 years behind Europe when it comes to this. And so that's my prayer, is that we open our eyes to that. And so we're going to dive in real quick to a 12-point sermon. No, just kidding. We're going to be reading out of the book of Mark, chapter 6. And Bria, my daughter, left me a note one time, and it says, "I love you, Chris. Chris, I love you so much." And then I just had to remind her that I'm dad. She learned to read and write, and all of a sudden it was, Chris. No, you can write Dad. That's okay, Dad, Daddy. So we're going to be reading out of Mark chapter 6 and going down to verse 30. And this is the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. And it says, "The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, 'Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest.' So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, so he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. 'This is a remote place,' they said, 'and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat.' But he answered, 'You give them something to eat.' They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, "5 and 2 fish." Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. But he also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. 5,000 people. 5,000 people. That's an amazing number. And I know many of you have probably heard this preached 1,000 different ways or more. And when God laid this on my heart as we were preparing to itinerate to raise our funds, I was like, "Lord, what is it that you want me to give? What are you pointing out to me?" And it was just one thing. And that one thing is that Jesus knew that the bread and the fish were there. He knew that they were there. He wasn't guessing. The disciples didn't know. But he knew it was there, and he sent them to look for it. And what I take from that is that God knows what we all have to give to him. So whether you are here sitting in this room and you're like, "I don't know what I have to give for the furthering of the gospel." Because there's many people that sit in pews, just like this, sit in chairs, and they're like, "What do I have to give? What do I have to give to further the gospel? What do I have to give for the furthering of this church?" And I'm here today to tell you that you have something. God knows what it is. You just need to not preach, but to pray and seek out what that is. You know, it might just be, I like to joke, it's like, you may have $1 million in the bank. I don't, but you may, and that might be the way God uses you. But you might be somebody who can pray. I already know a pastor's wife is a prayer warrior. Amen. You might be a prayer warrior. Or you might just be somebody who just loves to cook. Just by cooking, you're spreading the gospel. That's right. Search. As I go through today and I tell you my story of where I came from and how our calling into ministry, you know, if you watch that story, I didn't know everything that I was going through was going to lead me to go into missions, to lead my family into missions. But as I look back, it's always easier to look back to see what God has placed in your life. Seek, as you listen to our story. So I like to say that my family's calling into missions was with my mother. My mother was a first-generation Christian, and she went to Italy as a foreign exchange student. Can you believe that? I'm going to Italy, and she was in Italy. And so when she was in Italy as a foreign exchange student, she felt God told her that she would return to Italy to spread the gospel. And I don't know about you, but if you grew up in the church, you know, you hear, oh, yes, I can hear God speaking. That's normal. But for a first-generation Christian who's not really used to that stuff, that's like, God's speaking to me. I'm going to be doing something. So she tucked that away in her heart, and she's a California girl. I still don't know why she was up in Washington State, but that's where she met my dad. My dad is from Minnesota, so California and Minnesota meeting in Washington State. I still don't understand how that works, but it's all God. And so they met, they got married, they were attending a vineyard church. You may be familiar with vineyard churches. There's not very many of them left, but they were attending a vineyard church. And while they were there was a word of knowledge that they essentially needed to go to Italy. And so they had that in their hearts already, and God just kept confirming it. So within, I think it was 3 to 6 months, they sold everything they owned, except for us kids, and they moved us to Italy. And we arrived in northern Italy with the help of an Assemblies of God missionary by the name of Terry Peretti. Terry Peretti's brother is Frank Peretti. He's one of the authors of a lot of Christian books. And so if you hear Frank Peretti, he's written many books, but Terry Peretti's his brother and was a missionary in Italy for about 40 years. He retired just a few years ago, but he got us into northern Italy. We were working at Girls Teen Challenge Center, And I was about 7 years old, and so I learned a whole lot about stuff about what goes on in a teen challenge center. Very young. I learned things I probably should never have known. But it was while we were there that we met up with another Assemblies of God missionary who had a vision of starting an international church in Rome. And so my parents prayed about it, and they joined this other missionary by the name of Terry Hoggard. So we have a Terry Peretti and we have a Terry Hoggard. And we went down to Rome and we helped start the international church in Rome, which is still going strong today. And Terry Hoggard has moved back here to the States. He works with Convoy of Hope right now as a missionary still. But it was there at this church that I believe that my calling, I didn't know it at the time. I think I know it now, but my calling into missions began. You see, I was a teenager. How many of you remember being a teenager? You're right there. I think he's probably still a teenager. So I think I was 14, 15 years old, and we had an evangelist had come to the church, and he was also gifted with words of knowledge. And so we had all the teenagers, all 10 of us, because that was how many we had, and we were up in the front praying, and he was praying over us, but he had a word of knowledge for every single one of those teenagers, including myself. But I was the good pastor's kid. I made sure I was at the end of the line, so everybody else got taken care of first, because pastor's kids are good at that. And so, needless to say, when they got to me, he prayed over me. He did have a word, but we ran out of time. And so he did what all good pastors do, is they went and they go tell the parent. So he went and told my mom that what the word was. And so afterwards, I went to my mom. I was like, Mom, I know he came and told you. And what was that? And she goes, I'm going to wait. I'm going to see if it comes to pass. I was like, Mom. And unfortunately, even to this day, I do not know exactly what that word was. But I believe that it's what we're doing right now, going into missions. You see, it's always somebody else before it's you. And I say that because at that same period of time, there was another word from my parents that one of us kids would return to Italy to continue the work. And it's always somebody else. My sister married an Italian-Brazilian missionary kid. They were working with my parents up in northern Italy at the starting of a new international church. My brother, he sold everything he owned, but he blogs for a living, so he moved to Italy. He was working with my parents. And then tragedy strikes our family. Both my parents passed away in a house fire in Italy in December of 2016. And I tell you that because it's part of our calling. You see, my sister lives in Nixa, Missouri right now. My brother lives in Cleveland, Ohio. And then God calls us. It's always somebody else. I was comfortable. You see, I'll back up in the story. I left Italy at the age of 18 and went to Central Bible College down in Springfield, Missouri. Graduated in 2001. I was gung-ho. I'm 21 years old. I'm going to become a children's pastor. A single guy trying to become a children's pastor. That doesn't happen. No, I even interviewed for a position in Flint, Michigan about 20 years ago for a children's pastor. But that door shut. I don't know if you're familiar with the Boys and Girls Club. The Boys and Girls Club is a national after-school program. It's in many of the big cities throughout the country. And they have them in Springfield. And so that door opened up for me to work with kids. So for 20 years, I worked for the Boys and Girls Club in Springfield. And I always asked my dad, I was like, Dad, why am I here? I have this degree in youth ministries, but it always felt like the right place. And Kim in a little bit is going to be coming up to share exactly what we're going to be doing in Italy. But you'll see that God placed things in my life. I didn't know what they were, but he was training me to go into missions. Did I spend 20 years learning and not knowing why I was learning it? Yeah. But I learned how to take care of kids. I learned how to run a facility. You see, I started out as lifeguard. I worked my way up to teen director. Oh, wait, teen director is like youth pastor. I was program director. That's like associate pastor. And then I was the unit director running a facility with 300 kids and probably about 30 staff. God placed things in my life. as we went through things. And then we'll move forward. I have, Kim will tell you that she told me when we got married that she was not marrying a pastor. Well, I'm a pastor now. So don't ever tell God never. And so we're going on with life. My parents pass away, and we're meeting with our life groups, our small groups pastor at our home church, and kind of going over what's coming up in the next year. And we're just there, and she just kind of stops and looks at us and goes, I think God's telling me to ask you why you're not in Italy. And we're just kind of like, that was the last place we would even thought of going. And so we stopped, we prayed about it. And as you know, whenever God lays something on your heart like that, you're always looking for the no. That no, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so we went to my dad's best friend, Terry Hoggard. He was in Springfield, and we said, we think this is what God's laying on our hearts. And expecting, no, that's not it. No, it was like, yes, you need to go. And so, okay, so we stopped and we went the next level up, which is Paul Trementozzi, who's over Europe, all the missionaries in Europe. And we sat down for coffee with him. I was like, this is what we feel God's laid on our hearts. And he's like, yes. Well, what do we got to do? Well, you need to get your license to preach. And I was like, okay. So I go to the district's website, and I'm looking for another no, or something that's going to extend this out. And I get to the district's website going, okay, I'm sure there's going to be a few classes I have to take. And I get the district's website, and it was just check mark, check mark, check mark, check mark, check mark. I got all the way down, all the way through ordination. I was like, oh, so that's why I went to Central Bible College. I didn't, even though I didn't use it for 20 years, God had already placed it in my life. And so all I had to do is go take that wonderful test and sit in front of a bunch of people and answer questions. And it's like, all right. We looked for the no's, but they were all yeses. The doors just kept opening. And God's just been amazing throughout this whole process. And we're going to watch a video here in a second. And when it's over, Kim's going to come up and she's going to share what we're going to be doing in Italy. And I will say that the video, the statistics in it are for the United States. Hopefully the next time we come back through after a term in Italy, we will have our own statistics and our own video to share with you. Amen. Thank you so much, and we'll watch that video now.
We spend hundreds of billions of dollars, our country does, nonprofit organizations do, rehabilitating. We have to spend our money preventing, and that's what this organization is about. It's the mission of Royal Family Kids to help transform communities around the country and the world by interrupting the cycles of neglect, abuse, and abandonment of children in the foster care system. We get an array of children. In every case, though, these children have been neglected. In many cases, they've been abused physically and or sexually.
I grew up in foster care ever since I was 3 weeks old, all the way up until I was 22 years old. I grew up in a total of 6 homes. My first home, my foster mom, she passed away with cancer. I was with her for 8 years. Second home, I was with her for 8 years as well, and that's when I was introduced to Royal Family Kids.
So RFK is known as a camp, and it is very much a 5-day camp held in 43 states in hundreds of communities. So a camp is vital for these kids because most of them never experience a vacation. They never experience setting where it's safe to be a kid.
We're already trying to subside the trauma that they've been through. Their trauma took place in a relationship. I mean, whether it's mom, dad, or someone else, the trauma was relationship related. So what's happening at Royal Family? We're building relationships with these kids.
So Royal Family Kids has changed a lot in my life. It helped me find my identity because growing up in different homes, sometimes you lose that. You forget who you are. And I remember okay, I'm a child of God. I'm beautiful. I am courageous. And adventurous. So it just reminded me of who I was.
So camp is the powerful way in, but we also mentor these children. We have mentoring clubs for them. And these are phenomenal year-long programs where these children who spend 5 days together are also able to come together every single month. So these children finally have somebody who they can turn to. We can solve this problem. We're already doing it, but we need your help.
If we can do some preventive work, and if we can invest up front in these kids, we are going to drastically change the trajectory of their lives. And what we're going to do then is build stronger communities. And I think all of those things are a very good reason to get involved with Royal Family Kids.
You can make a difference. You can volunteer. You can share us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. You can make a donation. You can go to our website and find the Royal Family chapter in your community and call the director. You know, not everybody could be a foster parent, but everybody can make a difference. We can do this together.
So just like that passage in the Bible that Chris used earlier, Jesus knew that the loaves and the fishes were there. He placed them there for a purpose. The disciples didn't know that purpose. The person and the people who had the loaves and fishes didn't know of that purpose. But God knew, and God had pre-planned for that to happen. Similar to Chris's story, my story began, I was a first grade teacher. I taught school for 2 years. During that 2-year time, I lived with a roommate, and we started doing respite care. Respite care is where you take kids from their foster parents for a weekend, and you just provide that service so that way the foster parents can get a break. That respite care situation turned into a full-time placement of a sibling group of 3 for about 3 years till we worked with the state and the biological mom to help reunite. During that time, I transitioned out of teaching. I didn't feel like that was where I had a rough year. I didn't feel like that's where God had wanted me. My roommate was getting her social work license, her master's, and then she wanted to spend a few months in Kentucky learning the ropes at an international adoption agency. So I was done teaching. I was single. She said, "Hey, I'm moving to Kentucky. Do you want to come with me?" And I'm like, "Sure, that sounds great." So we get to Kentucky. I am able to become full-time on the same staff at the same adoption agency that she's with. And then about 6 months, we had transitioned and had like 3 houses. There was mold, and then someone else got married. And finally, we just felt like all the doors were closing in Kentucky. So we told our boss, we said, "Hey, we understand we've only been here 6 months, but we want to go home. Let us go back to Missouri. We will open up an office for you in Missouri. We'll do all the work. We'll deal with all the bureaucracy. We'll find all the papers. We'll get it all licensed. You don't have to pay us. Just let us go home." So she did. She let these 2 20-year-old kids open an office. I've been at that office for the past 16 years. My job at this international adoption agency was to work with the adopted parents. I was training them on trauma and how they would come into my office and say, "We are so excited. God's called us to adopt, and this is going to be an amazing journey." And it was my job to say, "Whoa, take a step back. Yes, God has called you to adopt, and that is wonderful. And God's heart is for children and families. But this is not going to be all rainbows and sprinkles. This is a rough journey. This is a roller coaster. Not every day are you going to get a warm fuzzy. These kids have trauma. And it was my job to walk them through what trauma looks like. What trauma looks like when you bring it into your house, when you bring it into your family with your other biological kids there, and how you can't go about meeting these kids with trauma in the same way you would meet a child who's had a normal upbringing. These kids have a traumatic past. It was not their fault, but it's there, and you have to deal with what is there. So I walked alongside them as they were becoming licensed, and then I walked alongside once they got their kids in their home and in the post-placement process. I was there and help them navigate the ups and downs and the fact of when reality really hits you. Okay, now what do we do? So for 16 years, God was preparing me. I didn't know what for. All I knew is that I loved my job. Chris and I both worked for nonprofits. Life wasn't easy, but God always provided. God was always faithful. We felt that we were comfortable. We felt that Springfield was where we were supposed to be, that we were both pouring into professions and people and families that we loved and we were ministering to. And then God calls us. God calls us out of our comfort zone. God calls us away from our nonprofit steady jobs. We had moved across town for the good school district. We were set. We were laying down roots. We were happy. But God's plan is so much bigger, so much more amazing than you think than you think your plan is. God's plan is so much more bigger and so much more powerful. So when we were called, we knew that we weren't necessarily called to pick up the baton of Chris's parents. We weren't called to preach and teach at an international church. We are thankful for their legacy. We are thankful for the lives that they've changed. But that's not what God called us to do. That's not where our passion was. That's not where our education, that's not where we felt our hearts being pulled. So we started looking. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. If something was out there, we were happy to piggyback off of that and just pour it into Italy. So we looked. Is there an after-school program out there that we can use and minister with Italians in Italy? And there's not right now. There's a lot of little ones, but there's not like a big AG one that we can say, okay, we're going to take this box and use it. So we kind of taglined our ministry as children's ministry outside of the four walls of the church. Italy is full of refugees, but it's also full of Catholics. Catholics aren't going to send their kids into an evangelical church. They're just not going to. That's scary for them. Even though the majority of them have never met an evangelical Christian, they have preconceived ideas of what that looks like. So we want to house our programs outside of the church. We're going to work with all the churches in Italy and get the volunteers and get the basis, but we want our church to be, or we want our programs to be housed outside of the church. Right now in Italy and most of Europe, even before COVID, once the school doors closed, there's no after-school programs. You want your kids to play a sport, it's not there in the school system. You have to private pay for that. So you have to pay for the uniforms, you pay for the coaches, you pay for the transportation, you pay for the food, you pay to get your kids to the games and the practices. It's all out of pocket. So even before COVID and shops and parents' jobs were closed down, they were struggling to survive day to day. So most families couldn't afford the after-school sports programs. So once the school doors closed, we all know as parents, sometimes kids don't make the best choices. They roam the piazzas, which is the squares in Italy. We want to have an after-school program. We want to be able to open the doors of this program and draw the kids in with fun things. In Europe, most people want to learn English, so offer English classes to these kids, offer tutoring, offer a place to play a sport, just offer things that these kids aren't going to get and reach them. Because once we reach the kids, they're going to start interacting in a relationship with our volunteers and with us and realize, I like these people, but tell me more about you. We draw them into church. Once you get the kids in, the parents see the difference and they want to come too. So once you reach the children, you can reach their families. That's right. So part 2 of our ministry is Royal Family Kids Camps. These camps are for kids with trauma.